Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about soul rest. I know that it has been one hell of a year, and we all need some extra TLC right about now. So don't worry, I've got you covered this month, and I'll make sure that you feel recharged and replenished so that you can finish out this crazy year with energy to spare. All right, let's jump into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey everybody, it is Mary, and I am so freaking excited about today's episode. I had the pleasure of interviewing Melody Miles, who I know you are going to absolutely fall in love with. She is the emerging millennial leader on rest, self-care, and creating space in life for your soul to breathe. Formerly an international expert at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she managed millions of dollars and helped launch the global campaign to eradicate malaria. After working in 25 African countries by the age of 30, y'all, she found herself hyperventilating through a panic attack, confused why she felt so stressed, exhausted, and unhappy inside the life she always thought she wanted. After quitting her dream job, selling her belongings, and traveling solo around the world, Melody founded Soulcation, a company that helps fellow hustlers, perfectionists, and world changers develop regular self-care routines that revive the soul. In addition to sitting on nonprofit boards and working as an internationally sought-after consultant, Melody is preparing for the release of her book, Soulcation, Living a Life You Don't Need a Vacation From, bringing her powerful and emotional message about why doing the one thing the world told her not to do was the best thing she ever did. All right, guys, get ready. Without further ado, here is my interview with Melody. Hey y'all. Oh my goodness. I am so pumped about today's interview. I have been waiting for it. It was like the stars aligned to make this conversation happen in the perfect timing, which is just always the way that it is, right? So cool. And as you guys heard just a few minutes ago, Melody is kind of a badass. I mean, and I shouldn't say kind of, she is a badass. She is amazing. And, it's like one of those things where when you have people in your life that inspire you, you can't help but get excited for them to share their knowledge. Like I'm in this conversation as much for me as it is for you guys listening. So Melody, girl, thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you?
So good to be here. Doing great, Mary. Thanks.
Man, this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. Everything that you are about, this whole idea of peace and calm. And I can't remember who had that quote where it was like, I think it was, oh gosh, I'm blanking on it now, but she talks about having a life designed that you don't need to go to therapy for. And I don't know if you remember like who said that. It's like somebody on Instagram. And I just love that idea of like designing a life that in your words, you don't have to take a vacation from. So I want to get into all of those juicy, good details about what it looks like to create a soulcation. But before we do, I want everybody to kind of have an idea of who you are, because like everybody who comes on the show, you didn't just wake up and here you are. It's like this has been a journey to get here. So rewind the clock for us and share a little bit about your previous life, your future life, and where you sit today.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, I resonate with the professional woman who's checking all the boxes, who's working hard, who has a calendar where she's juggling all the things. I was a humanitarian and philanthropist, and I worked for Bill and Melinda Gates. So obviously one of the richest couples in human history that have generated the most wealth in human history. And I managed their Africa malaria portfolio. So I was in charge of all of their work in terms of diplomacy and policy and delivery of interventions. And so I had a big career and I kind of climbed that ladder. And that's what I thought that's what I thought the dream life was, right? A big job, changing the world, and I do wholeheartedly believe that doing meaningful work does bring you joy. But deep down, I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. I was numbing my emotions. I was just kind of using busyness in my job to distract me from the part, like the kind of storm inside of my soul that I didn't know how to deal with. And I wore a lot of masks and was great at hiding, right? I think sometimes when you hide in success, no one's going to call you out.
Yep.
And so I did that for many, many years until I had my very first panic attack. And for
Oof.
people listening, I'm Mary. I don't know if you've talked to your audience about panic. I didn't even know what it was, but I
Yeah.
ended up like nauseous, head spinning on the bathroom floor down the hall from Bill Gates and couldn't get myself off. And that moment, I'm happy to talk more about that, but that moment really was the beginning of a soul transforming journey towards rest.
Gosh. I mean, I can so deeply relate to having panic attacks from overexertion and just sort of this like pressure of making sure everything is right and keeping up and doing all the things. And I was curious, are you an Enneagram 3?
I am with a 2 wing. So like I will serve and I will hustle till like
Yep.
the end of time.
I am the opposite. So I'm a 2 with a 3 wing. So, and I wore the 3 mask like predominantly for until several years ago, like just, oh my gosh, working myself to the bone and being so exhausted. And I have a horrible history of panic attacks. And you're right. It is one of the absolute worst feelings in the world. Like you feel like you are going to die. And I remember like reading that part of your story and your journey. And I was like, God, I can so relate to that moment where you're in it and you're like, how has this become my life? Like, how did I get myself here? Kind of that moment of awakening and in the midst of like horrific emotional pain. And I know that one of the things that you've taught a lot about is this idea of the anxiety epidemic. So what is it that you're seeing like with people who are kind of addicted to all the busyness and the hustle? Um, what's showing up? Like what is this anxiety epidemic and why do you feel like it's so prevalent right now?
Mm-hmm. Such a good question. 1 in 4 women in this world today report either like severe or significant signs of anxiety. And we all wear busyness as a status symbol. And
Yeah.
so I see it time and time again that particularly women, and this does have to do with the patriarchy and culture, and we've inherited a lot of things about what it means to feel safe and be loved in this world that I think we need to unlearn. But we prove our worth by putting others ahead of ourselves. And we deny our body needs, our emotional needs. And so it's this deep self-abandonment at kind of the core level of women that want to be good, want to be helpful, want to be good
Mm,
servants and mothers that are putting other people's needs ahead of their own in the spirit of self-sacrifice. But it's really then just neglecting the parts of their emotional world that if we're just tended to, if just had space and time, would be able to be like metabolized and the women would be able to move through it, but we get stuck in our emotions because we don't have the space in our life to process them.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Guilty.
And that and that's why like I believe we're our own best healers, right? That my
Mm,
mission is for women to create space for themselves because I believe when you choose yourself and you create that space for yourself, you all of a sudden access this capacity to heal and to move through things in your life that you don't have when you're go, 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 go. And
yeah.
so we all seek answers outside of ourselves, but sometimes the best answer is just slowing down enough to sit with yourself and trust your own inner voice. And in a world where we are pulled in so many directions, that permission slip to give ourselves exactly what we need, is so hard. I find, particularly for women, but
Yeah.
for everyone.
Well, I think you're right. Because I think for women, it's like we've had this whole narrative for all the reasons that you already shared, but this whole narrative of like, you have got to lay yourself down in the service of other people first before you ever and probably never get to take care of yourself. Like there's a lot of self-sacrifice awards and medals, from a societal kind of standpoint. And it's interesting. So I'm just imagining like hearing what you're talking about and everybody who's listening and myself included, this longing for that different way of being, this longing for a a kind of space where we can slow down and listen and hear what it is that we intuitively need. And I would love for you to kind of walk us through like the how of this, because I think in theory, it sounds really good. Like, hey, you can heal yourself. And I'm like, I jump on board. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm so into that. And yet, because we haven't been taught how to do this isn't something that we learn in college or after we graduate or whatever. It's like, only through, you and I have similar journeys, and then only through a lot of soul searching do we kind of figure this out. But if we could make that journey a little bit quicker for people, like how do you carve out space for rest, like tangibly, kind of realistically, the how of that? What does that look like when you don't really know what that means from a, let me put it into practice standpoint?
Yes, good question. And I so often go back to that girl on the bathroom floor that had no tools, no resources, didn't know how to move forward. And thankfully, I am trained as a scientist. And so this value of experimentation, right? To say, the journey is up to me. I'm going to design experiments and just see if this works out. And I do think sometimes there needs to be something more intentional and focused. And so when I talk about a soulcation, sometimes people do need like a month or two that's very intentional. You tell your people, hey, like I'm on soulcation, or for the next few months, I'm going to be putting myself and my mental health first. But what I talk to a lot of clients about, and this is what I believe is possible when I say design a life you don't need a vacation from. As I studied and did research and interviewed women, I asked them what they would like to do on vacation, right? If they had a complete break for themselves. And they told me things like, um, take a nap in the middle of the day, like have a morning to myself to read or write. They told me like have a leisurely dinner that I don't have to cook. They told me going on a long walk in nature. And so I was collecting all these things that women were craving that really had to do with time for themselves and were really possible to do at home, right?
Yeah.
Really possible to do in your everyday life. That what they wanted is time to feel good, time to um, be with themselves, and to essentially meet their needs before everyone else's. And so if you can do one thing, I'm a big believer in a morning routine as a simple way to carve out space for yourself. And what you do in that morning routine, we can talk about, whether it's writing or meditation or something fun that you literally just enjoy, that makes you happy, that when you wake up, you get to do something that makes you happy. Because I believe happiness is the fuel to change, right? So many times we think we have to work hard and push against resistance. But I actually believe that happiness can be that way towards transformation. So adding something that makes you happy in your morning can be a powerful
Mm.
thing. But I always suggest, if one time a day you can do something you'd want to do on vacation for yourself, that can be kind of the gateway to transformation. And it blew my mind because I was used to working so hard. And so when I
Yeah.
took my soulcation, I realized that transformation came through play, came through investing money and time in myself, came through doing things I enjoyed, right? That my healing came from doing the very things that I was denying myself, that all along I had permission to give myself.
Yeah.
So
Which
yeah.
there's so many ahas in what you've said. And I just keep thinking like the typical year calendar includes like 2 weeks of vacation and that's it. And this is like a really strange year also because we're in the midst of COVID. So that's kind of like turned all of that on its head. And we're sort of in this weird like limbo space of a lot of people are at home now. They're working from home. So it's kind of like feels a little bit like vacation, but it's not, obviously. And then still it's like a lot of people aren't traveling right now. So they're not getting that space to like really move and get out of their environment and change it up and seek some of that variety that I think can oftentimes create a natural state of renewal just by like being in the nature, being in by the beach, being somewhere else besides their home. And so as I'm thinking about this idea of soulcation, it's like when we don't have a whole lot of time in our society laid out for this, like this to me feels like very counterculture. How do you advocate for yourself in, especially like this year in the craziness, and that is only going to feel like get crazier as the months go by with the election and everything that's coming up. So it's like, and maybe you can just even share just like what you're doing, but I'm thinking, okay, the next several months that we've got coming up, kind of closing out this year, how does that shift and change when we think about Soulcation in the environment that we're in today? And then how can we still advocate for ourselves to create that? Hey y'all, I'm sure you've been hearing me mention my Fully Alive Circle membership, and you might be wondering what it is and how you can join. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So the Circle membership is a safe place for women to gather together in a heart-centered community to take this deep dive into personal transformation. So it's my online membership where you'll learn how to find yourself again through daily devotional practices. Inside of our private Facebook group, I share resources like guided meditations, yoga practices, essential oil recipes, journal prompts, and so much more that dive into our monthly topic that we explore right here on the Living Fully Alive podcast. And all those resources are delivered to your inbox weekly to help you create powerful change in your life. So if you're looking for an affordable way to continue your journey of living fully alive, then definitely check out the Fully Alive Circle membership. Just go to maryhyatt.com/circle and you can find out all the details and join. All right, now back to this week's episode.
Such a good question. We are living in such an interesting world where so many people, you're right, do go on vacation and they go to escape, right? To distract themselves from their everyday life. But then they come back and they still have the boss they don't like, or the job they don't like, or the relationships that aren't serving them and are edifying. And so I think the first step, whether we're in COVID or not, is to really identify what's not working, right? Because that 2-week vacation is never going to solve the root problems of things that are out of alignment in your life. Oftentimes for women, it's things they don't want. They kind of know they don't want it, but they feel ashamed or embarrassed to name that they don't want that in their life. And so there's some kind of reclaiming your voice and your power to say, like, this is a no for me. Because I think the more we design our life around things we really want and say no to the things we don't want, kind of that automatically kind of brings more joy and happiness. But I have found, and I've done this for myself recently, I wrote a happy list. So I was like, what can I do in COVID? Like, I thought back to like what I like to do as a child, where I took dance classes. And, you know, like I think as children, we actually spend a lot of playful time at home. Right? Like our pleasure doesn't come from travel when we're younger. And so I kind of went through this brainstorm exercise of, you know, why did I like cooking with my mom in the kitchen? And why did I like swinging on the swings? And like really trying to tap into more like childish, playful things. And I just like, and things like taking a bubble bath and using nice lotion and turning off my phone an hour before I go to bed and having that be like me time. And I am single, so I'm grateful that I don't kind of have to juggle the demands of like another, you know, raising other humans, which is something I've chosen for this point in my life. But regardless, like people know, like the hour before I go to bed, like that is a boundary. That is melody time. I get to light a candle. I get to read the book I love. Like no matter how hard my day is, that beginning and ending really nurtures a lot. And that's where I do the things on my happy list, right? I literally like pull it out of this desk that I'm sitting in right now and look at my happy list. And so when you ask women what makes them happy, sometimes they'll be like, oh, like if my kids are well behaved, or oh, if things are going well at work. But like, what makes you happy? Like what makes you come alive?
And don't you think like a lot of people don't even have a clue anymore?
Right. They don't know how to answer that question. Which is
it's so tricky because it's like, I think that's one of those things where when we've put everybody's needs ahead of our own for so long, creating that happy list, it may start out with like one or two things. And I love like going back to what you were saying earlier about the experimentation, like the willingness to experiment and just try on different things. Like, I don't know if I like doing this anymore. Like, I think that's actually has been one of the gifts of, especially when we were in like serious lockdown. It was like, we had to figure out what brought us joy if we had the mental capacity to do so, like in ways that we weren't used to and not being entertained. And I think that that's one of the things that is so interesting about all of this is like where we typically go, I think for what we think is replenishing is like Netflix, a bottle of wine, um, food, all of these things. And I'm assuming that when you're talking about your happy list, it doesn't necessarily mean those things. Is that accurate?
It is correct. And I've actually come up with a framework. I believe there are two types of rest. There is this numbing rest and then this restorative rest.
Oh, okay.
And I actually believe we do need both in certain times. So the numbing rest is the Netflix. It is the scrolling through Instagram. It is kind of just the checking out, overwhelm. And the restorative rest is more of that spaciousness where you have time to reflect and connect with your emotions and process. And I do think we need both. I think the problem becomes is that we are so obsessed with numbing rest, that all the rest we do in the world is numbing rather than the connecting and restorative rest. And it can be a hard concept to process. And I do think along the way of a healing journey, you do need that numbing rest to kind of just you need to till the soil and then let it lay dormant for a while and till the soil. But we live in a culture where we haven't been taught to rest. And so our brains literally just resort to numbing rest.
Gosh, it's so simple, but so profound. That's why I love any kind of framework, because it just sets it up where you're like, okay, now I can see the two categories, the two boxes, and I've been putting all of my rest in that numbing rest. And I think it's so normal for us to do that and feel like, okay, this is good. I'm relaxing. And yet it doesn't ever really fill the tank back up. It's like every time I do that, and I do that, and I want to say there's no shame in that, because I think, like you said, we need it. We can have both. But I think that what I've found is that I don't leave those experiences. If I, for a night, just check out and watch Netflix or scroll through Instagram or whatever, I don't wake up feeling restored or feeling replenished. I kind of almost start where I ended yesterday. It doesn't really cancel anything out or give me more energy or life. It's just a way to sort of, like you said, check out, disassociate, numb, totally, not be in the present necessarily. And, what's interesting is I'm thinking about all of this and this whole idea of soulcation. And I want to kind of go back a little bit to what you were saying about the boundaries, creating boundaries for yourself, where you say, okay, this hour of time I'm going to spend towards this kind of restorative rest. What comes to mind, because I just feel like my one-on-one clients are coming in my brain right now, and this constant theme that I hear of being selfish, spending that time on yourself is selfish. So how do you combat that limiting belief that this kind of restorative rest is selfish? How do you get beyond that so that you can give yourself permission for it?
So, I mean, that is the one limiting belief and lie that, it took me years to unlearn, and will change your life, but do want to acknowledge how powerful that is. And I think we spend a lot of our lives learning, and that the true gift of soulcation and freedom is learning how to unlearn that belief that we can't be selfish. So to your question, how do we do that? I actually do want to go back to the moment where I was in my therapist's office. So after that anxiety attack, right? So I'm at the Gates Foundation. I can't walk back into the meeting, on the bathroom floor, literally go to the emergency room.
Yep.
Thought I was dying. I'm an infectious disease specialist. I was ordering the doctors to do brain scans. I was like, I must have some emerging of the next version of COVID. And the doctor walked in and said, this is just anxiety. And my mom had just passed away. I had just ended a relationship. I remember being on the couch of my own counselor, who asked me that exact question, kind of what do you want to do to feel good? And I was like, well, you tell me what I can do to feel good. I don't know. And she said, okay, let's just take it one next step. Let's do one small experiment. And I think how you rewire the brain is that you say, I'm going to be selfish for 15 minutes today. Or what would the selfish version of me do? And write a letter, write a letter to yourself, being the very selfish, extravagant Melody is writing a letter to the balanced, normal Melody, right? What would she say?
Yeah.
But I do just believe in the power of that next right thing, because Soulcation, it gives women vocabulary, right, to kind of claim for themselves they're doing the soul care work, gives them maybe a little bit more permission using that vocabulary to give them some time. But the answer lies within them. And so you don't at the beginning of your journey know that answer. And one thing I did in my healing journey to connect with my body is I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is a 500-kilometer pilgrimage across Spain. And,
No small thing.
there's a spiritual element to it, but I remember showing up with my iPhone because there's not really like maps or an app. And you literally just follow spray painted yellow arrow, like on
Oh
the
my gosh.
ground. And I was like, you're telling me that I'm going to walk almost across the whole country based on a spray painted yellow arrow? And so I made it. I followed all those yellow arrows and I made it to Santiago. But I say this example and I tell this to my clients, you actually don't need to know how to get to Santiago. You just need to look at the next spray painted yellow arrow.
Gosh. So
And
good.
that, right? Like if it feels good, right? Like, okay, let's experiment. And then if something felt good, like that you did for yourself, okay, let's do that again. Let's do that again.
Yeah.
And if there's so many coaches and messages in this world that invite you to look outside of you, but if you can trust just that next yellow arrow, and do the experiments to really tune into your inner guidance, I really believe that that's how you're going to heal your soul.
Yeah. And it creates so much trust inside of yourself too. Like the more you do things that feel good, the more you're willing to like show up in service to yourself, the more self-confidence that creates of like, okay, I can do this. And somebody didn't go hungry, or my kids didn't die, or my business is still running, even though I'm spending time with myself, on myself, and it's okay. And I think that what's so beautiful is that what came to mind when you were sharing sort of like, what does this look like, of the selfish part of yourself coming forward and saying, okay, girl, like, let's have at it. To me, it's the pendulum swing. So if you've been living in this state of like hyper restrictive, again, everybody first, hustle, giving all your energy out to the point of exhaustion and burnout and panic attacks, then if you think about the pendulum, and this is exactly what I did. This is like a totally separate topic, but I did this with money. So it was very similar in that I was like super restrictive with money and had that like frugal mindset, scarcity mindset, and all of that. And then I started flipping that and going all the way to the end of the other side of the pendulum, and became really generous, overspending, to the point where I got comfortable with that idea of giving out and receiving more, and eventually found the middle, which is so beautiful, of like having this kind of beautiful money management mindset, or I'm looking at my stuff, I'm taking care of my bills, I'm saving, all of that. And yet there are these beautiful moments where I'm splurging, I'm spending money on people, on experiences, the things that bring life and enjoyment to my life. And I'm thinking in the same way, it's like this pendulum swing of the self-care, where it's like for a little bit of time being willing to do what feels so extravagant, so that eventually you kind of come into that middle range where you go, okay, this is what it looks like to do this kind of soul work every day, and the kind of ritual and the kind of routine that you're talking about. But I'm really curious, because I'm like clueless on this. You said that before you did this Soulcation, where you like actually, it sounds like, kind of checked out for a little bit and really tended to the needs of your soul for a month or two. So how the heck did you do that? And what did you do? And like, I mean, how realistic is that for everybody? Like, if you were to prescribe this to somebody, what were the elements of that Soulcation?
Yes. So I did have a dramatic moment, and I'm so glad you brought up pendulum swings. I was actually talking to Lisa Wetchell, our mutual friend, this morning about some of my own pendulum swings I'm on, actually related to money and relationships, and feeling, just for anyone listening on this journey, that sometimes that swinging and momentum and energy is really needed in order to come back to equilibrium. And so not to judge ourselves in that swinging. But I did have a big moment. I mean, my pain was deep, and I ended up quitting my job. So I'm going to tell a story of like the extreme experience I lived through, and then also tell people how I felt, like what things I believe in that experience can be applied to everyday life. But I quit my job. I sold my house. I got rid of everything I owned but a suitcase, pretty much.
Wow.
And it was that moment to say, like in my life where I was like, I've reached the top. I have all these things. I have this life. I don't even know if I want it anymore. I'm going to let this burn to the ground and trust that what is real and serving me will be sustained, will come back into my life, right? So I had to let things die, and kind of going back to that unlearning, sometimes there is this death that needs to happen in a soulcation. So before you start adding, you really actually have to start taking away without knowing what's going to be added back in your life. So mine was very extreme, where I was like, who is the girl? Who is the girl without the
Yeah.
house, without the fancy job, without the fancy network? Like, who is that girl? And so I actually ended up spending about 18 months living out of a suitcase, and I lived in
Wow.
12 countries, and I'm writing some of that in my book. But that is my story that is birthed kind of the deeply personal truths that I know. And what I can tell you from that time is that I thought I needed this extraordinary life to be happy. And when I was on sabbatical, it was the most ordinary things. It was the long cup of coffee in the morning. It was the ceremony where I wrote vows to myself and read them out loud around a fire pit to strangers. It was the long walks on the beach. It was the processing my trauma by writing for hours and hours. It was things that didn't cost much money, that were very simple, and that didn't require anyone else. And I should say, I always thought in my life, I maintained a lot of friends, but I always thought like I needed, like in case the shit hits the fan, I need these people in my life to like carry me, because I
Yeah.
didn't have the internal resources myself. And a lot of this healing work I did on my own, right? Like my
Yeah.
community was changing, I was by myself. Um, but it was those ordinary things that really transformed my soul, and just having time to like wander, not be productive, not have to check my calendar, like all the things
Yeah.
we need a plan, and we need goals, and we need to like do all these things every day. And it was actually the absence of all those things that changed my life the most.
Wow.
And so now a lot of my coaching with clients, and what I would tell people is, let's see what we need to take away. Like, what do we need to burn down? What needs to die? Um, and obviously that comes with emotions, and is not easy. Like, I really want to validate as I say this, that letting things die can be the most sacred, painful,
Yeah.
long journey that you go through in life. But it is through those deaths that you create the space for new life to emerge that serves you.
Gosh, I'm like, preach. Like totally. I've been through it. I mean, I didn't take 18 months to do it, but I think one of the things that's been revolutionary in my life is this idea of retreat, and to go on retreat. I know there's sometimes that word is interesting. Like anytime that I host one of my own retreats, I think like, is this the word that I want to use? And I love the idea of like soulcation. I think that's like, it's a way better word. Way to go. Good job. But it's like, we need time away from our life to gain perspective. And the times that I have had the most profound experiences have been on retreat, have been on soulcation, have been away from what is, because that cycle that we get in is so addictive. I mean, it just like, we think that we have to do all these things, like that it feels so important and that we don't have any choice. And there's this obligation and we have to, you know, show up to please this person and do this and maintain this idea of our image. And there's so much to keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with life, that that idea of like kind of going, okay, what isn't serving me anymore and what needs to go away? Sometimes it's hard to see in the midst of all of it. I mean, this is why obviously you and I are both coaches, because we value having sort of that other set of eyes on what we're just sort of habitually doing. But I think that getting out and getting on that idea of soulcation, that idea of retreat away from what is normal everyday life, is so powerful and profound for that idea of perspective. And I think that one of the things that's interesting, because obviously you and I have both been, I feel like maybe yours is a little bit more extreme, but in similar ways, like we gave up a previous life that we had in exchange for the life that we're living now. And I know that sometimes that for a lot of people can feel really scary. Like I remember working with a client and she said, listen, I'm afraid that if I embark on this work that like, you're going to tell me I need to get divorced, or you're going to tell me that I need to quit my job, or you're going to tell me that I need to sell everything and move somewhere. And even though those elements have been part of our journeys, it's like, it doesn't always have to be that like extreme of really dismantling every single thing in your life and starting over. So for people that have maybe that fear of like, if I go into this, it's going to destroy everything. How do you coach them through that fear?
I think I try to help them connect to the feeling they want to feel in life, right? It's like following that fear to the end, which it may be a real fear. And often we have these instinctual reactions because maybe there is something there. But to know that that through the journey, right? And I think that's what the Soulcation process is about. We are going to have you do things that feel good all along the way. And you're going to trust that feeling of feeling good. So the more they can connect to that like, I'm never going to ask you or coach you to deny yourself or to kind of push against something where there's resistance and that really feels bad. That this is about deepening the trust. And there may become a point when there's a deep enough self-trust and a deep enough clarity that you would make a big decision. But at the beginning, it's really about the small things, right? It's a daily right action that you can take to connect with the feeling you want to feel. Because no matter what you achieve, no matter who your husband is, no matter if you're the richest man in the world like Bill Gates or the poorest of the poor in, rural Uganda, which I've also spent a lot of time in, you are only going to feel happiness if you choose to do so, if you can connect with that. And the only way you're going to be able to feel happiness is if you can equally feel grief, right? So you have to access both of those feelings. And it's about developing a healthy relationship with your emotions in a way to be able to experience them, move through them. Like every day, I literally write down what I feel physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And it's such a reminder of like the very rapid change of our emotional state, right? So a client may feel really afraid of something one day, but the next day they're going to have a whole different set of emotions. And so just to remember that the more you access the complexity of those maybe fear, grief, uncomfortable emotions, you're also developing the capacity to access love, happiness, optimism, joy, peace. So the journey to rest is really the journey of learning to feel safe in the whole spectrum of your emotional world.
I love that. God, I love all of that so much. And I know that you talk about rhythms of rest. Like if the goal is to get more rest, what does that even mean? Rhythms of rest? What are they? How do we do it? Talk me through that concept.
Yes. Right. A soulcation is not like you quit your job forever and like spend all your money and say like F life. There are hopefully you're designing a life where there's a kind of more alignment or energy. So your work life or kind of the responsibilities you have to do feel more in line with who you are. But in terms of rhythms of rest, it is this cycle of strategically and thoughtfully planning things in your life so that even if you have a busy season, you're going to have time with yourself. So for example, like the Soulcation methodology is that, you look at your day and spend at least 15 to 30 minutes doing something on your happy list every day. But then once a month, you spend a full day with yourself or like a kind of 8-hour an 8-hour kind of session that's really dedicated to yourself. And then once a quarter, you spend a weekend with yourself. And once a year, you potentially go on a week vacation by yourself. And it is this structure of building in time to cultivate the relationship with yourself as you would like a husband or a partner. But I really do believe that it's not energy. There are lots of things outside of our control that require energy, and we manage our energy by knowing what refills our cup so that we can have these rhythms of rest, both morning and night, every week, every month, and start to trust that no matter what comes our way, that we have access to something to energize us so that we don't fall into that numbing and then more numbing and then more numbing. And we get so behind that there's just so much emotional crap to process that we're like, oh boy, right? Like,
Seriously.
We need a week at the therapist's office.
Yeah. Check me in. I'm ready to go. Totally. Well, and I love that so much because it's so intentional. I mean, I just think how often I hear like, okay, well, when I get done with this, whatever, fill in the blank, then I'll take a break. when this finishes, then I'll finally have some time alone, or when, whatever. Like there's all these sort of qualifiers that XYZ has to happen before we can chill out and rest. And as we know, it doesn't go that way. And it ends up sort of looping into the next cycle, and you never take that rest, because if you don't have those parameters around rest for yourself, then obviously something else that feels more urgent or more important is going to come in and hijack the whole thing. And so what I love about this, of having the rhythms, is it's like, okay, that it's coming, that rest is coming. And that, I would add to this, like, that it's a non-negotiable. Like, this isn't something that is, if you have time and space for it, it's like, no matter what, you end up making space for this. And it's not just going to happen on its own. Like, I think that is what I'm hearing that is resonating with me so deeply, Melody, is that that's like, it's not going to just happen. Like, we're not going to just accidentally happen upon rest. Like, there's too much coming from the outside that's encouraging us to not rest, that if we leave it all to default, we just, end up in the bathroom floor with panic attacks. So it's like, okay, then the opposite of that is being intentional, like you said. So I want you to repeat that. So would you say once a week? Can we just go through that real quick? Because I thought it was so helpful.
So and before I do this with my scheduling, I also, in terms of the vows I wrote to myself, a lot of those vows are about keeping these rest commitments, because you don't break a commitment with your doctor, or you don't break a commitment with your boss. And so why do you break a commitment with yourself? And there's so much in terms of like the limiting beliefs around that. But in terms of the structure, so once a day, you spend 15 to 30 minutes doing something on your happy list. So something that feels good, right? Something you do on vacation. So once a day, 15 minutes of happy time. Once a week, I take myself on a date. So like a date with yourself once a week. Once a month, a day with yourself. So kind of like a Saturday, 8 hours where it's completely you time. Put that on your calendar. Once a quarter, it would be great if that could be a weekend. So like an overnight or a full weekend once a quarter, where you're nurturing either your creative work or your relationship with yourself or something that matters in life. And then once a year, spending a week with yourself, like taking yourself on vacation. So those are kind of the general structures that we think about when we plan your Soulcation. And so again, it's something you can do in your everyday life. Doesn't even need, if you can't ever pay for a hotel room, there's ways to do it so you never would have to like put your credit card down for anything. But would be doing things that bring you joy and things that are in the restorative rest category.
It's so hopeful. I just like, again, that sense of longing comes back to me of like, yes, like, thank you. I need just that guidance to know, okay, here's what it looks like. And I think about and talk about often, I know you do as well, like this idea of curating your life, like designing your life so that it is a life that is life-giving versus depleting. And this is a beautiful way of curating your life, of like really setting some non-negotiables here for adding in that time of rest. And what do you see, like, now that you've been practicing this for a while now, like, what is the ROI? What's the benefit? What's the payoff that you see with yourself and your clients, just to sort of give the people who maybe haven't experienced this yet a little bit of window into what is ahead that they can look forward to?
Oh my gosh, it is worth every single investment. Like I'm smiling, I'm beaming, I'm like wearing a tank top and working from my bedroom right now, but I would not trade it for anything. Like, a lot of people probably saw the life I had and thought it was glamorous, thought they wanted it, and I will never go back. Like, I am my own boss. I manage my own calendar. I take naps in the middle of the day. I spend an hour with myself in the morning. I say no to people I don't want to like be with. I have so much clarity and power now to use my voice with what I want or not. And so I am moving to most likely to live and work on the beach in 2021, because my dream life is living my life in a bikini by the water, working from my laptop. Yes. And that is so possible. And it's like going to happen. And that is like lots of us work our whole life so we can retire and like live this life on vacation. And there is a way to live your life in places that you go on vacation and enjoy them for far more years than just like working hard till retirement. So,
Mm, I
yes,
love it.
if anybody like is doubting, I wish you could see my face right now, but I'm just beaming, and I've seen it in clients as well, where it's not, oh, you work hard so you can like live life on the weekend. It's that you align your whole life so that you actually can do the things you want to do that make you happy like every single day.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is a come to Jesus moment conversation. I feel like this is a great opportunity to self-evaluate, to see like, am I, am I living that life? And I know that for most people, it's probably a big fat no. And this is where the work, comes about, is looking at, okay, what am I believing that is keeping me from thinking I can be like Melody, or I can do what Mary does and have this flexibility and this freedom? Because, like, girl, I'm telling you what, I take a nap almost every day. And like, not like a 20-minute nap, like a 2 hour nap. Like, I'm a long napper. I'm like that. And I mean, let me just tell you, I scheduled my day around the nap because that's so important for me. And I just function way better when I have a nap. And, but again, it's like designing your life, and it has taken me, it sounds like it's taken you years to get here. So it's not like overnight kind of process, but it is that intentionality. And I think even just a conversation of, oh, I can work in rest to what I'm doing. Oh, let me have this pattern interrupt real quick to see, is what I'm doing, is the life that I'm living really what I want to be doing, how I want to be living, or is there something else? And this is, to me, a big invitation to explore that and to look into that. And I just love everything that you teach and everything that you are about. And I'm so excited about your book that is coming out and all the things that you have in the work. So for people who want to stay connected with you and really like follow this journey, how do they do that? Where do they find you?
Yeah, so I'm over at Instagram at the Melody Miles, where I'm just cultivating a community of people and helping them um, choose rest for themselves every day. And then we are developing a Soulcation planner so that you can actually, instead of just putting a to-do list out every day, that you can also schedule in these 15 minutes, these days, these
Yes.
weekends away of rest. And so that's coming out with some more content in January. So
Yay. Gosh.
stay tuned. And then, really quickly, I do want to just touch on privilege because I was a humanitarian and have worked in 25 countries. And a lot of what I hear is that rest is only for people with resources or people with
Mm,
privilege. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question, and want to acknowledge that there are certainly constraints and barriers to people with less resources, but also the best investment you make is in yourself, right? That a
yeah.
lot of us have more capacity to choose this for ourselves. And so just an encouragement that, yeah, instead of putting a down payment on a house, I don't own a house. I put a down payment on this journey of rest, and spent a lot of that money on um, really healing myself and transforming my life. And so um, we all have our own unique barriers. But in someone who was literally an expert on kind of comparative suffering and
Yeah.
the poverty of the world, I truly believe that the most healing we bring is when we heal ourselves, is when we
Yeah.
heal the world. And so for anyone doubting the worthiness of healing themselves or investing in their own healing journey today, I would um, just want to give you some love and encouragement, that decision is so worth it
Yeah.
and that you're so worth it.
It's so, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It reminds me of Ariana Huffington and her book Thrive. And I can't remember the exact quote, which is like common with me. I remember like partial quotes. But she says something to the effect of like, you're way less effective when you're asleep at the wheel. And this idea of like, if we are going to, as people of privilege, go in and change the world and be in service and really co-create with other people and be in that space of generosity, like we can't be asleep at the wheel if we're going to like have impact on the world. And so I think that that just echoes into what you're saying, and that it is so powerful when we can pause to heal ourselves we show up in such a more powerful way. And it is privilege, 100% is. And yet we can use that to be in service. So Melody, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is amazing. I'm so grateful for your whole journey because it's blessing not only me, but everybody that you come in contact with. You're such a bright, beautiful soul. And I'll make sure to link to Instagram so you guys can follow her. She's coming out with so many great things. So stay in touch, like put the thing on the notifications where you actually get her posts because you're going to want to see them. But any last words, any last little, nugget for us?
No, just that rest is the best, is such a good medicine. So you have power to heal yourself, and the power of creating space, choosing rest is really a gateway to so much freedom.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys, I'm so excited to be with you for our final episode next week. So stay tuned. But until then, just remember that the purpose of life is to be grateful, to be great, and to be full. I'll see y'all next week. Bye. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some amazing nuggets to take home and start implementing into your life. And if you're looking for the show notes and links, head on over to maryhyatt.com/show. And if you loved it, why not bring your girlfriends along this journey of becoming fully alive with you? Just give a quick share of this episode to your social channels and enjoy those debriefing convos with your besties. Thanks again, and I can't wait to connect with you next week.